Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host, and I'm joined by the film encyclopedia man, Boaz Dix. We are a couple of filmmakers on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode we pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on VOD. Myself and Boaz pick our favourite film from that topic, or team up against a guest and battle it out to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 2. So, The Real Thing podcast, what is your pick for Brad Pitt films? I have a feeling we may be breaking a lot of rules here.
We went with David Fincher's Fight Club from 1999.
Nice.
Yeah.
So why did you pick this movie for Brad Pitt films?
For me, I mean, Nick can answer for himself, but I mean, for me, I noticed Brad Pitt probably for the first time in, I would think, 91 when I saw him in Thelma and Louise. That was the first time I noticed, and there was something about him that impressed me, and they portrayed him as this, washboard abs, Adonis, perfect looking guy, but something about his acting method, something about the way he portrayed the character and the way that he played felt like, I just had the feeling like, I feel like I'm going to see this guy again. And then he, starts turning up in like River Runs Through It and Legends of the Fall. And I mean, again, every film, he's got his shirt off,
And then he's like, can I keep my shirt on in the next movie, please? I'm getting cold.
They were pushing him as the sex symbol, and I think he really didn't want that. And I think from as early as True Romance, you see him trying to branch out into different kinds of roles. But I would say really when he did 12 Monkeys and then 7 and then this is really where Brad Pitt took control of his own career and said, I will dictate my own persona. I'm not going to let Hollywood tell me what kind of actor I'm going to be. I'm going to make my own choices. And he did it. And I respected him for it. He could have very easily kept trading on the leading romantic lead for a long time.
And I think a lot of actors like Brad Pitt making that transition have to do at least, like he did, do at least 2 to 3 films that are consciously trying to break away from an image that he had built up early in his career. Because, you do one, it depends on the movie, but generally, doing 1 or 2 films doesn't really break people's consciousness that somebody's trying to expand and broaden their horizons. So, but I do think that after this film, especially, he just hit the ground running and said, now you can see that I'm capable of other things. And this is kind of where I want to go with everything. Like, I'm not saying that like other movies that he's been in later, that he couldn't be a little bit of the suave guy and kind of the good looking guy. But I think it was more of like, I'm not just going to be the take your shirt off guy. Yeah. I can come back to it, to the sense that I could be that suave guy like he was in the Oceans movies, where he was a guy that was very capable of stuff, and he did it with a very cool image. He wasn't trying to be more than what he presented.
So what happens in Fight Club?
The film opens up with a gun in the main character's mouth, who is referred to as the narrator. He describes that 12 buildings around them have been surrounded in blast gelatin by Tyler Durden, who is the guy who's got the gun in his mouth. And he says, I guess I should go back to where this started. And so essentially what this is a story about is about a guy who develops insomnia. So it kind of goes on, and this guy is a very, he's a very typical modern nesting consumer. And so he's just kind of existing. And he meets a guy on a plane flight, and the guy introduces himself as Tyler Durden, and he apparently makes soap. And he's got some very interesting, if not nihilistic, views on society. Edward Norton finds him very interesting. He comes back to his apartment this one night, and apparently a fire was started by a spark going off in his refrigerator or something in the back, and it sparked a big gas fire and blew his whole apartment up. The person that he thinks to call is this guy, Tyler Durden. They're talking about, like, why is it that we feel we need to be good consumers to be complete people? Tyler Durden's point is that it goes completely against our natural instincts, which are to be hunter-gatherers, not to be consumers. And so they wind up going outside, and the guy says, hey, thanks, for being there for me. He goes, hey, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to hit me as hard as you can. And he says, what are you talking about? The guy who's the narrator, Edward Norton, he's going, I hit you. He's going, yeah, hit me. And he goes ahead and hits him. And they start getting into a very awkward fight. And it's obvious that they enjoy it. So they start doing it, and other people start noticing, and they start a fight club. One guy who's actually played by Meatloaf, this guy who actually develops, he was an ex-bodybuilder, and he took so many steroids that his body actually counteracted by upping the estrogen and giving him like huge breasts. So it's kind of comical watching Meatloaf with these huge giant tits. But so they all start joining in, and all these different guys start showing up, and Fight Club becomes like a phenomenon. And they start hearing about it in other cities. It becomes obvious that Tyler is wanting to take this to like the next level. And they start something called Project Mayhem, or at least he does it without the narrator's knowledge. So as this Project Mayhem gets started, they start doing these different weird things, like lighting a fire in the shape of a smiley face on a building and destroying a huge art gallery with this giant metal ball. Like just these crazy little things. And the narrator is getting scared and concerned about that things are getting out of control. So he starts to find like flight ticket receipts from Tyler that are going all these different places, but he has no memory of any of this. So he says, well, Tyler apparently has been busy. So he goes and he goes to all these different places that Tyler has been going to. And he finds out that he has been starting fight clubs in different cities all around. And he's finding out that these people think that he's Tyler Durden. But then he starts really thinking about it and going over it and over it and over it. And then when he's in his room, Brad Pitt just shows up. You're a figment of my imagination. You're not real. And he's all like, well, I'm real enough. He lays it out to him that he's like, yeah, basically, when you switch off, I switch on. And so Tyler has decided that he is going to stay in control. So he takes over, and then Edward Norton, he's got Edward Norton tied in the chair with the gun. And Brad Pitt is basically saying, without me, you would never have been able to do all of this. Look at how far we've come. Look at what you've been able to accomplish because of me. Before, you were sitting there shopping with your damn IKEA catalog, Edward Norton says, well, wait a second. And he starts realizing that if he takes himself out, then he takes Tyler out. Tyler's all, whoa, okay, that's an interesting theory, but wait a second, let's talk about this. And the narrator actually winds up pointing the gun in his own mouth and shooting himself in the mouth. How he does not blow out the back of his head, but somehow bullet exits his jaw without actually killing him. And apparently this was enough to sever Tyler. And Marla is brought up then by the members of Project Mayhem, and they bring her up, and he's like, yeah, I got some things to explain to you. And then all of a sudden you see all the buildings behind them being demoed. And they're just falling, and that's the end of the film.
Wow.
So, initial reactions to this, Boaz? What did you make of this film?
Man, it's amazing. I love this film. It's one of my favorite movies. Yeah, I've watched it many times.
I like this a lot. I wouldn't say I grew up with it, but I definitely watched it when I was in high school. And every time I see it, I get a little bit more out of it.
Yeah.
It was one of those movies where when I watched it the first time, I didn't know what I was watching.
Yeah.
It took me a while to understand, like, the perspective of the narrator, Edward Norton, and to understand what his mind was going through. So, but I enjoyed it. I would say probably by the third time or fourth time I watched it, I would think the right perspective. But that hasn't stopped me from finding and discovering more things as I watch it, like I did the other night. There are subtle things to see in this movie that might not always be there the first time you watch it. So
yeah, sure.
I think it was kind of like really worked with your mind, and I think what I got out of it was just it screws with your mind a little bit.
I think for me, when I first watched this, I didn't make it to the end. I didn't like this. I think I probably watched it way too young, and all the nihilistic stuff and was just too much for me to a younger age, I guess. Even aesthetically, this is just so grimy and horrible. It's just like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. But as I got older, I watched it again. I made it to the end. And, and obviously I didn't know the twist that Tyler is Norton. That kind of blew my mind. And I was like, this is insanely good. And obviously rewatching it for this, I still really like it. There's a few issues I have with it. If I was to pick my favorite Fincher Brad Pitt movie, I would probably still pick Seven for me. I prefer that one. I think because there's just a little bit more of an element of hope in that, I guess. And I like Morgan Freeman a lot in that.
Again, like you, I was very mixed the first time I saw this film. I didn't know what to think of it, honestly. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. And again, the nihilism was scary. There were parts of it that almost felt like a call to arms to dangerous people.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, that was a concern at the time of its release, was that this film was going to be like Clockwork Orange. It was going to incite people to do bad things. It was like, so it was kind of a phenomenon when it came out. It was a film that everybody was very polarized on when it first came out. It was not successful, not like it is now. I mean, now it's considered one of the best films ever made. But back then, they didn't have that opinion of this. So it was interesting to watch over the past 20 some odd years, to watch how public opinion on this film has changed. Because I knew there was something special about it, but it was just hard to put my finger on it. It was unlike any film I'd ever seen before. But I have to admit, every time I watched it, I liked it more. It got to the point to where, it's right up there. And as far as films of the last 25 years, it's probably top 5.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. As far as across the board, yeah.
I do consider this one of my favorite films. I do agree. I think it's one of the few films that I think it does get better per rewatch. You're like, oh my God, I'm getting... It's not even just, you get more from the dialogue, you get more from the philosophies that they're talking about a lot more. You get more like clues, foreshadowing to what I think is one of the greatest twists ever. There's so much foreshadowing, and even now on rewatches you go, oh shit, they kind of signaled it even within the first 5 minutes of the film. I'm like, oh my God, there's a clue about the twist, and they do that constantly. You're like, man, I'm always getting something. And I love discussions on this film that pick up allusions to the twist and stuff. yeah, there's some really creative stuff done with like camera work and how the story is presented. It's very
Conventional.
Yeah, it's very unconventional, incredibly unconventional, and it does things, that you just kind of probably wouldn't do. But it's just very unique. I think it's a very unique film, and I do enjoy watching it and just picking up on these like different styles and different camera work and different ways you can do dialogue. Just some, all these little small bits, and I quite like it. I think it does get better every rewatch.
So, directing then, I really enjoyed a lot of the opening scenes of this film. I liked how the film slowly creates, I would not say reveals, Tyler. In a lot of the scenes, you see this random, like, dark figure just pop up on the screen, like this figure was just in one frame of the reel, and you're like, what the hell was that?
Like when he's at the copy machine and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you see Pitt later in the airport moving away from camera, like a little red herring to suggest he's a different character, but no, he's slowly being created in Norton's mind.
Everybody catches the one at the copy machine, but there are 2 other slides that he's in as well. So he actually shows up quite a few times. I like that. It's like Where's Wally, but for Tyler Durden.
It reminds me of like when he takes that job as the film projectionist and he splices porn into the kids' film. But what I got out of that, just because you were mentioning it, it almost feels like those characters, like the copy machine and the 2 others, are spliced in there where you think you saw something, but you're not sure.
Yeah. Blink and you'll miss it.
It's almost the same kind of idea.
Yeah. I even like, on a rewatch, noticing things like even where they do the first flashback, so, with the gun in his mouth and all that stuff. And then I love where it's just, him staring at the camera, oh, let's go back. And his body literally launches into a flashback. He's right there, stood in front of the camera, all bloody and beaten. And his body literally pulls across and he smacks into, Bob's massive tits.
Yeah.
I just think that's a really cool way of doing a flashback. Right? You're literally moving into the flashback. Yeah. So even from that scene, you're like, oh, he's doing a lot of creative stuff, the director.
And back then, Boaz, I'll say that in 1999, that was pretty new, that style of filmmaking. That was that 90s kind of, you know what I mean? Like we're just...
experiment with everything sort of thing.
Yeah, just filmmaking, it definitely went up a notch in the 90s, I felt. And Fincher was right on the precipice of that. I felt like people like him and Nolan were really the ones that drove us into the next century.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you pair like Fincher with Nolan because format-wise they're on the opposite directions. Like Fincher is one of these guys that won't film on film anymore. Right. It's like purely digital, where Nolan and Tarantino just film. So aesthetically, they're very different in terms of that. But obviously, you can definitely see that direction for Fincher with because there's a lot of digital stuff with roaming cameras, a lot of digitally created stuff with like the bomb disarming scene near the end.
My point being more like the innovation, the style that they have developed. Obviously, Tarantino's style is very different, but I mean, more than any other director of the past 25 years, I would say Fincher, Nolan, and Tarantino have kind of formed this triad of
quality, frankly.
Yeah, like that really kind of pushed filmmaking to the next level and really took it further than where it was. It was almost like a new age of Mavericks.
Yeah.
It's almost like we were seeing like another age of Coppola and Bogdanovich and Scorsese and those guys, where their influence was that widely felt. So to me, I feel like Fincher is up there as one of those directors. Movies like Seven and Fight Club are 2 big reasons for that.
Yeah, definitely. I find the decision to tell Tyler Durden's like backstory, if you will, about him fascinating, because Norton talks about, putting frames of porn in family films. Durden literally points to the corner of the screen to show a cigarette burn. And Norton is like basically
Yes.
breaking the fourth wall the whole time in that scene. And it's like Norton is actually telling us this is not real. I have made this up. There's no other reason why I should be telling you this.
Yeah.
But by breaking the fourth wall, he doesn't break the fourth wall with Marla Singer. You know, the scene is so separated from reality compared to the rest of the film that it has to be fake. You know, but because the narrative choices have been so varied, like the imaginary plane crash, the IKEA sequence, you assume everything is real. You know, this is just the way Fincher is telling the story. So I love how the scene is literally telling you this never happened, but not directly telling you, kind of thing. But you just have to go with it.
Right. It's a copy of a copy of a copy.
I like the where he's pricing everything that he lost in his home. Or, I think this was even before he lost everything in his home. Where he's like just going through channels, like looking half days, going through catalogs and stuff, and he's like, you know, this is my entertainment. And I just love how it's, you know, everything is priced and everything looking like it is in the catalog around his apartment. I thought that was a pretty good, and that's kind of strange because I do see that method being used more and more now, where you're like, you know, basically moving text into, you know, the film.
Well, because you've got this new generation of filmmakers that grew up with Fight Club.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so I think scenes like that, they definitely. Another thing that I always thought was surreal as fuck is where he gives, you know, his speech on basically, you know, you're all singing, all talking crap of the world. And I love that. It looks like it should just be like any other scene in the film, because that's how it's shot. He's just in the basement. He's talking to literally no one. He's talking to the camera. And I thought for a minute maybe he's talking to, you know, some of the people in Fight Club or whatever. But then it gets like really surreal because the screen starts shaking.
It's wobbling, yeah.
It was wobbling like hell. And then and it gets so close to him till it's just his face and it's wobbling. And it shakes so much that you can see the actual film, like the edges of the film, you know, coming back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and that was always surreal to me because you're like, it does constantly break the fourth wall, but this is it is literally
wobbling the fourth wall,
moving the actual film stock. Yeah. Like this is actually the stock of film. Yeah. That's what exists in this, you know. And I always thought that was quite surreal, and I've never seen that replicated that much.
Yeah. Favorite shots, scenes, people. Mine is probably the first opening shot that comes out of the credit sequence, and the camera comes out of Norton's, basically his brain.
Yeah, his brain. Yeah.
And that comes back along the gun barrel. It's just an incredible shot to get you into this movie.
I thought it's pretty cool as well because you're not entirely sure what the hell you're seeing.
Yeah.
You're seeing all these patterns.
You only work it out once the shot finishes.
You work it out, yeah, once it gets... And you're like, oh my God, those were like neurons and then cells and then, you know...
Grey matter.
His brain and then, you know, yeah, his grey matter, his brain and then the outside of his head.
And again, I have to say that in 1999, seeing this for the first time, that scene in particular was like, whoa. Nobody had ever seen anything like that before. That was a new idea. It's been done many times since then, but it was a new idea then.
Another scene I really liked is after he disarms the bomb, after he's like come to his senses.
Yeah.
And then their whole fight, I just love how it's like a real fight from his perspective, and then it keeps switching to like the security cam.
Yeah.
And he's just kicking the shit out of himself and throwing himself downstairs.
Yeah.
But my favorite part of that sequence is, and I don't know exactly how they did it. There must be like some sneak cut, or it must be, it's masked at some area. But where he tries to shoot at Tyler Durden. Tyler Durden kicks the crap out of him. He runs like hell. And then just as he's out of shot, Tyler just comes out of nowhere and clotheslines him. But it's all done in one shot. Yeah. I like that. He just leaves him there, runs. He's out of shot there, and then he clotheslines him on the other end.
He must be like, that's not fair. You haven't teleported before.
Yeah.
Is that your favourite scene, Boaz, would you say? Or shot?
That might be one of my favourite shots. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's my favourite. Like, there are a lot that I really like, but that definitely comes to mind.
Nick, what's your favourite scene or shot for Fight Club?
I don't know if it was the first fight of the Fight Club, where they beat up Jared Leto's character.
Oh, yeah.
And he at the end says, I wanted to destroy something beautiful.
He is unrecognizable in this film, by the way, Jared Leto. I'm like, hang on.
Yeah.
Is that Jared Leto?
Yeah.
He looks just so different, in my opinion.
It's one of those guys that, like, you know him now, and then you go back and you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I remember when he was Jordan Catalano on My So-Called Life on MTV.
Really? Okay.
Wow.
That was his actual first thing that he did.
Yeah, now his career has gone crazy, shall we say.
Yeah.
As in, not in a positive way.
Well, it's actually gone both. He's actually done some amazing performances, and he's also been marred by some bad choices. It's kind of weird. He's definitely got the stuff. He's a good actor.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. It's just, sometimes it seems like he makes weird choices.
And just tries way too hard, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he should just pick more like independent stuff.
Dallas Buyers Club, I loved him in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's awesome in that.
I mean, and I think it's really his choices. It's not a reflection of his acting. That comic book hero, superhero type stuff might not be his forte.
No.
I don't think it's a reflection on him. I just think it's a reflection of the choice of the role.
I enjoyed the Joker scene at the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League a lot more than I enjoyed what he did in Suicide Squad.
Yeah. Jack, what's your favorite scene or shot in the film?
There's many that are incredible shots. I will say I'll go this route.
Okay.
I'll give you the one that makes me chuckle every single time. It's the one where they're doing Project Mayhem and Bob is trying to pick a fight with one of the people in the art area, where the museum is.
Yeah.
And he keeps trying to get people to fight with him. And at one point he just runs after a guy in a bike going, ah!
Yeah, that was good.
The whole part where they're trying to get people to fight with them, where they're trying to pick fights, I think that's my favorite part.
And lose, supposedly.
I like the bit with in that compilation scene. I like the bit with the priest.
Yeah.
They keep hosing him off.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He's like, "Excuse me, did you?" Hoses him. Yeah, I like that because he punches him and then he's like, "Sorry," and then he runs away.
And I love how the priest like runs and does this total like girly hit on him. And then tries to run away. Like it looks like a couple of 12-year-olds on a school lot.
Yeah.
I think my favorite one is just the one in the car park, and one of them just pushes a guy and something. I'm not sure what it is, but something just goes flying through the air and falls, and he just falls over on his back. That makes me laugh every time.
For me, that's probably the most entertaining scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Boaz, directing score, what should we go for Fight Club?
Yeah, I quite like it, man.
Are we talking 9s or 8s? Personally, I would go high 8s.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I would go like 8.9.
Okay. I think that's all right. It's close enough to 9. I'd personally go 9.
I just feel like sometimes with the direction and all the different narrative choices, it's confusing itself.
But I wonder if that was the intention.
Yeah.
With this story in particular.
That just kind of bothered me a little bit,
I hear you.
It's just a mild criticism.
It's funny because I personally don't know other Fincher films in comparison, but based on this, I would say probably 8.5 to 9. I thought it was very well done.
I'm saying a 9. Do you want to agree on a 9?
Yeah, 9's good.
I think this is one of Fincher's defining works. And I think it is absolutely a defining work of modern cinema. Along with things like Pulp Fiction, I mean, it's that level of iconic.
I think it is definitely very unique, and it's it's only of this film, and you can definitely see its influences.
It's innovative, it's groundbreaking, it's different, and in how much it's been emulated since then.
I would apply all those adjectives you're talking about, Jack, to 7 for me. I feel you. I just feel like that is, obviously I haven't rewatched all of them fairly recently, but I would put that as my number one Fincher for me. It's perfection.
I would be hard pressed to watch those two one after another and really be able to definitively tell you which one I like better.
Yeah.
Just because I'm like, this one, but then again,
Yeah.
this one, and shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, screenplay then. It's interesting when Tyler Durden shows up, because I think it's quite clever in disguising that he's imaginary, because it's not in a very obvious emotional place for then all of a sudden this guy Tyler Durden turns up. Yes, you have the imaginary plane crash, but Norton has been obsessing about death and pain from frame one, practically. You know, the plane crash was very, visually dramatic, but it never felt like it was a significant moment in Norton's journey for Tyler Durden to be fully revealed. And I really like that. There's no way you're like, yeah, he's imaginary in that moment, So I just like the disguised narrative storytelling there.
Yeah. So I think it's done in such a way that you can sort of brush it off. He's just met some sort of eccentric person right where he needs him. But I do think the setup before that gives you a lot of clues, especially in hindsight when you watch it again, that no, this guy is make believe. So as you said, he has a vivid hallucination just before about the plane crashing. So he's kind of had it with life, and he already kind of imagined some really ridiculous things anyway.
But I don't feel like that's a significant moment, really.
Well, maybe it just kind of shows that he's already sort of mentally close to snapping anyway.
But you get that idea a lot earlier in the movie.
Yeah. But anyway, he's mentally close to snapping anyway. But the line that he even says before that, because he's like, I wake up at Pacific, I wake up at Mountain Central, lose an hour, gain an hour. This is a life and it's ending 1 minute at a time. He goes, you wake up at Air Harbor International. He goes, if you wake up at a different time and in a different place, could you wake up as a different person? And that after that line is where he meets Tyler. Straight after that line. It's like, if you rewatch it and you go, hang on a minute, that is so deliberate.
Yeah.
You could wake up as a different person, and then he meets his alter ego. Even when they're talking, I like little hints of, oh, you got the same briefcase as mine, as if that's
I know, I love that too.
Oh wow, we're going to be best friends, yeah. I just love all those little things darted throughout the script where even if that twist didn't exist, you're like, it doesn't come across as too forced. You're like, okay, yeah, I can believe that they'll be somewhat alike because, they're best friends and stuff. But yeah, it has a different meaning when you watch it again.
Yeah. I like how the film drops in random scenes to make you think, well, that's odd, the first time you see the film. And then the second time you see it, you're like, that makes perfect sense. There's a little scene where Norton is on an operating table and Tyler is sitting in the background out of focus, and Norton says, sometimes Tyler spoke for me. Tyler says, he fell down some stairs. Norton says, I fell down some stairs. And I feel like this was one of those scenes because it's so brief, you don't really have time to think about it. And I think if the scene was too long, the audience would be like, hang on a second, it's the same guy.
Yeah, you'd work it out.
Then after that, the film very knowingly separates the characters, where Norton thinks Tyler went over to Marla's place and brings her back to sleep with Marla. So the film is telling you, yes, these are two completely separate characters, even though they're not. Very cleverly written for me.
I just think the twist and just the way the script constantly hints at it, but never spells it out. To me, it's just always fun to just rewatch it. But even when he's sleeping with Marla, Tyler is pounding away, and the narrator is just trying to go other places to not hear this. So he's down in the basement, he's in the bathroom, he's in other places. And I like when he picks up the phone, from the detective, and you can hear Tyler pounding away. But when he picks up the phone, and again, he's down, and he picks up the phone, Tyler stops. I quite like that, where it's just, Tyler stops shagging, because he's obviously the same human being. He's literally had to get off her and answer the phone. And I like that kind of attention to detail.
There's also that scene where he's in the kitchen and I think she's about to leave. I think Tyler's down in the basement and he's kind of telling him what to say and all that. And he's reflecting about how this feels like two parents who can't get along. And they don't quite cross paths, and he's kind of in the middle.
Yeah, delivering messages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I quite like that. He's like, this conversation is over. This conversation is over. Yeah.
But it's just interesting too how both guys kind of, they're the same guy, but they control each other in slightly different ways.
Yeah, definitely.
You get the feeling that something's off, but it's hard to put your finger on what it is. To me, the first time I watched it, it did not occur to me that he was the same guy. That not almost until the very end.
Yeah.
That's why I think the script is really good, especially the twist, and especially its rewatchability, because it's such like a monumental twist that it refames the entire movie. You have hints of the twist all about, but it could easily come off as it just really too easy to solve. If it was written in any other way, you're like, come on, I can work this out. Or nine times out of 10, people would pick up on these clues and then they would work out the twist. I think it gives you enough to work it out, but all of that stuff's in the background. And everybody I've watched this film with and not told them the ending are all just flabbergasted when it happens.
Yeah.
And then you watch it again and you go, oh, how could I have been so foolish?
Basically, I just think that they did Jim Uhls, the guy who did the screenplay, he did a really good job of adapting Palahniuk's book. When you start with a great story like what Chuck Palahniuk did, it's a lot easier to make a great film, but there were so many ways that it could have gone wrong. And Fincher, between Ols's screenplay and Fincher's direction, combined with, outstanding acting, really pulled it off perfectly. I don't think it could have been done better for this type of story.
One clue I really liked was the crash that they have about, I think it's like 2/3 of the way into the movie. So, where he tells him to let go and, because Jack gets angry that he...
Oh, the car?
Yeah, with the car. Because he hasn't told him about Project Mayhem and he's with the other two guys. He's having an argument with himself.
What have you always wanted to do?
Yeah, that was brilliant. What I think is tremendous is like, how do you follow this guy? Because from their point of view, he is speaking very loudly to himself. He is having a full-on conversation. Yeah. Their master in chief is having a mental breakdown in front of them, driving on the highway. He's going to kill them. Like, how do you follow this man?
I mean, I think that is an element that I struggle with.
That's a great question you just asked. And I think that you can find the answer to that question in numerous religious leaders that have existed over.
Yeah, true. Yeah, like I can get that. Brad Pitt on his own is as Tyler Durden, incredibly charismatic.
Yeah, like fucking Jim Jones, man.
So maybe that just kind of somehow works its way around. It's like, yeah, he's a genius. He's nuts, but I can't doubt that he's a genius.
And I think that's what his followers are. It's like, he's, because he's like, he's the anointed one,
Or I think one scene where I think they think he's playing like 5D chess, but he's actually just nuts. And my favorite scene with that is where he's at the police station towards the end. And he's like, listen, he tells the police chief, I'm the head of a terrorist organization.
Arrest
We're going to destroy all the banks. Arrest me. And the guy goes, and the other officers are like, we love what you're doing, sir. Wow, you've got balls.
Yep. It's all taken care of, sir.
Yeah, you're making yourself a great example, but you were clear. If anybody interferes with the project, including yourself, we got to cut your balls off.
Yep.
You said you would say that.
Yeah, I love that fucking scene. Yeah, I love that where he's like, I'm not Tyler. You said you'd say that.
You said you would say that as well.
I'm definitely Tyler. You definitely said you'd say that. Yeah. That was a great scene. I love that.
What I like about that as well is the fact that it just shows like almost countrywide scale. That Project Mayhem Fight Club has consumed America. There is nowhere for Norton to go to get out of this.
But I just think it's kind of amazing narratively, especially in the first half, where this kind of gradually happens, where it goes from just him fighting, Tyler, and them having an anti-consumerist, anti-capitalist, sort of tribalist, individualist philosophy. And from that and fighting to building a club to they kind of almost very gently turn into a terrorist organization to they are a global cult, with millions of members. You're like, how the fuck did this happen? Like, this thing has just become insane.
What I like about it as well, it doesn't feel jarring. It doesn't feel like there's a sudden jump of Project Mayhem,
No, yeah, I do like that because it does feel gradual, where you're just like, yeah, Fight Club to, oh yeah, Project Mayhem, they're just doing pranks and stuff, to, no, they are a full-blown cult terrorist organization that's just permeated every level of society.
They kind of turn the kitchen area into like this global network.
Yeah.
They've got all the file folders and stuff on the walls and maps and stuff. And there's a sense where I think Norton's is kind of like, what's going on? He's kind of bewildered. The fact that I think he keeps going back and forth a lot of times, where it's like he's pushing it as Tyler Durden, but at the same time, when he's kind of focused on himself, he doesn't realize how big this is becoming.
Yeah, I think the catalyst for him, where he realizes this is nuts, is where Robert Paulson dies.
Yeah.
And then I think it's basically that, and he's like, no, this has gone mad. I
guess I see the final third of the film is kind of an emotional tipping point for Norton's character. Do I want to be a nihilist, or do I want to be with the person that I love, Marla? Before the car crash, he's having his doubts about being a full-on nihilist when he's basically forced to commit to being a nihilist by Tyler by letting the car crash. Tyler's like, okay, the keys to this mind is all yours, buddy. And Tyler disappears. But for Norton, Tyler was his guide in a way. So Norton doesn't know what to do with all this crazy stuff with Project Mayhem. So Norton is at an emotional strain that he resorts to, contacting Marla, who deep down he truly cares about, which causes Norton to realize Norton is Tyler. In turn, prompts Tyler to reappear because he's like, Marla could ruin everything that they've built.
Yeah, and it's not really a sunshine and roses romance either.
So I like how the film puts Norton's character through the ringer to find out where his true beliefs lie in this really entertaining, complex way. I love kind of like the emotional push and pull between kind of like his deep emotion for Marla that's kind of very deep in the surface of Norton's mind compared to like Tyler's nihilism.
I thought that's also kind of an interesting pull, because as we were saying, you go from gradually this becoming about their friendship, him and Tyler, to, Fight Club to a terrorist organization kind of gradually. The same gradual thing, I think, is him and Marla, because at the start, he doesn't like her. Like, it's very clear he despises her, but then it kind of evolves into love, that it actually turns out he loves her. And again, I think that was done pretty well. Not only does he realize that this film is not a simple tale of two best friends, but it's like a much weirder, thing where he has an alter ego is doing this. But also he realizes he's in love. I also find it funny because not a lot of people talk about that, but he realizes he loves her kind of around the same time he realizes that he's Tyler Durden. It's like, oh shit, yeah, I do love her as well. Yeah. So it's kind of a double whammy, I think, for him.
Yeah. It's one of the more interesting story arcs on a character I've seen.
At the end, I'm not totally convinced that the way he kills Tyler by putting a gun to his head totally works for me. I feel like they may have written themselves into a corner a little bit.
Yeah, so me personally, I would have preferred if he just blew his brains out.
Yeah.
Just like he didn't survive. He literally blew his brains out of the back of his skull. Because I think that would make sense. Because you're like, why would he just stop thinking about Tyler now?
Yeah.
Like, all he's done is had trauma to his face, right? So
I think the idea was that he shot out the part of his brain that Tyler was living in or something. I'm not sure exactly how that works.
Yeah, I think that must be it.
There's no way he's living from that, though. I mean, come on.
Scientifically, I don't know how that works, but...
And also, every part of your brain is kind of important. So it's like, if he shot out the part that had Tyler, surely he should shoot out like his motor functions or his ability to speak, or I don't know. He shouldn't just be like walking around.
I think at that point, we're just being asked to embrace the fantasy. I think at that point we're just like we're along for the ride, and at this point it doesn't matter. Because honestly, ultimately, is it really a deal breaker for you though?
No, because even though I think that bit is kind of disappointing, and I would rather he'd have just died, I do think it kind of not so much saves it, but makes it a little bit more palatable because it's quite funny and then sort of oddly romantic and then sort of very unconventional as well. Because straight after the shot, Marla comes up and his guys, and they're like, "Holy shit, man!" And they're freaking out. And he's just like, "Yeah, I'm fine, it's okay." And like, "Could you get me some gauze?" And I just thought that bit was fucking hilarious. And then when they go back in the lift and they're like, "My God, he's such a badass," It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's just weird that he and Marla have this kind of romantic moment at the end as the buildings are just falling. It's just amazing.
Because here's another thing. It's like, Tyler succeeds. He does what he wants to do. He probably has like completely wrecked the US economy by doing what he's done. So he's done it. So again, it's a very peculiar ending thematically. It's very unconventional, but it is kind of, it just ends with them holding hands. They're in love. Tyler's won, but cue in the song because I guess none of that matters. It's with Marla. And it's a very strange ending.
Exactly. It's like we're just going to laugh as we all are engulfed in flames,
Have you heard of the Chinese edit for the ending of the film? I thought that was fucking hilarious.
No.
In the Chinese government edit, they cut the buildings exploding, and then there's text that reads, "The narrator was arrested, and all of Tyler's men were arrested, and none of the buildings exploded." All of the bombs were deactivated.
All our credit card companies are fine in China. Don't worry.
I just thought that's hilarious. Yeah. Because obviously they don't want to... They thought that it would probably promote terrorism.
So it was almost like a war of the world. They were afraid like a war of the worlds was going to happen or something.
That people would rise up and stuff. So you've got to be like, no. None of this would happen.
That's hilarious.
I agree. It definitely works from a black comedy point of view, and it's very cathartic at the end. But I do feel like they did write themselves into a corner for me, and he probably should have died.
Yeah.
But you can't have Marla turn up and like, "Oh my God, your brains are all over the floor on the window."
I think it would be a very depressing ending.
Yeah, exactly. You can't have that. You're like, "Well, this sucks."
I do think you're kind of right. The writer is like, if he kills himself, that would end Tyler. But then, that's just too bleak as an ending. That's just completely pointless,
I think at that point, they just decided, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just leave it in. Fuck it. And ultimately, it didn't matter. But that's the one thing in the movie where you're like, what?
Yeah, you got to suspend an extra level of disbelief.
And then I guess you can always ask yourself, well, how did any of it happen?
Funny lines, people. What we got?
So much good stuff.
My favorite is actually in that scene that we've just been talking about when Marla shows up and she's really pissed at Norton and she says, "You fucker, you sick fucking shit, putting me in it." Oh my God, your face.
Yeah.
Yeah, Helena Bonham Carter is just amazing.
I love that bit as well where they're like having a coffee and he's trying to explain for her to leave, because he's got the news and, he's realized that he's Tyler Durden and he's in love with her. And I like where he's like, "I know that I've been unwell. I know it's like there's two sides of me." And she's like, "Two sides? You're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Jackass."
That's great. Yeah.
That's a really good line,
And then when he gives her the money and she goes, "I consider this asshole tax."
Yeah, that was brilliant, yeah.
And then the other thing that I love, she says, well, of course, I haven't been fucked like that since grade school.
Yeah.
And then there's also, "You take tuberculosis, my smoking doesn't go over at all."
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, both Norton and Pitt are just stellar throughout the whole thing. But she actually has the best lines.
Yeah. Do you remember when he comes to like save her and stuff, and then the police are over there and
she's infectious, toxic waste.
Yeah, I like that. She's just insulting herself. Yeah, that was great.
You got a favorite, Nick?
I kind of like the quote where he's talking about how Tyler Durden's about how certain things don't own you, that kind of like releasing yourself from the material world.
Are you talking about the chemical burn premature enlightenment scene?
Yeah, with the lie. I mean,
Yeah, with the lie. Yeah, that is a very intense scene.
He goes, our fathers were our models for God, and if our fathers bailed, what does that tell you about God? And he's like, I don't know. And he's trying to like picture a forest and a cave, and he's slapping the shit out of him. He's like, listen to me. You have to consider the possibility that God doesn't like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. But that is not the worst thing that could happen. He goes, like, we don't need him. Fuck damnation. Fuck redemption. We are God's unwanted children with no special place and no special attention. It's just like really kind of, fucked up stuff to be telling a guy. Well, him telling himself as he's like, burning.
Well, it's one thing when somebody is saying that to you and forcing you to do it, but when you're doing it to yourself, you got to be in a different headspace because you're fighting it, but you're also forcing yourself to be burned. That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
As opposed to if Tyler Durden was a real person.
Well, welcome to DID gone wrong.
Yeah. What I just find that scene very interesting when he's talking about God and he doesn't need him and he can just like make do on his own. It just kind of reminds me when we were doing like Nietzsche in philosophy, and his general idea was that he had a hopeful nihilism where he's like, nothing means anything, but that means you can decide your meaning. So that's what he's trying to tell him. None of it fucking matters.
Yes.
We can decide what we want to do, and he's like trying to give him this hopeful message as he's, trying to... It's kind of weird as well because he's giving them this sermon on nihilism and he's like baptizing him with fire. I think it's very symbolic.
Screenplay score, Boaz? What should we go for? I prefer the screenplay over directing, personally. Yes, the final scene... There is a wobbly moment, like why doesn't he die? But again, I agree with you, Jack. It's passable. You can still really enjoy the movie, and it kind of moves on very quickly after that. Anyway,
yeah, you don't care,
and the whole film is so clever. So I would say like 9.3, 9.4.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go 9.4.
All right. Nick and Jack, what's your score for screenplay?
I'd say either a 9 or a 9.5.
I'm going to go 9.5. I'm going to say innovation, just skillful writing, and just breaking new ground, just going places that had never been touched on in a film before.
Yes.
There was a lot of gambling being done with this film at the time. There was nothing like it, and like I said, at the time of its release, people were afraid of it. Yeah. They were afraid that it was going to make society unravel. What they didn't realize is that it was already, the unraveling had already started. So, yeah, for me, the writing was incredible. And couple that with the fact that a lot of gambles were taken that paid off. Yeah, that's unique.
You agree with that, 9.5, Nick?
Yes, I do. And I think you can appreciate it all a lot more now than back then, to look back and say, look how far things have come. And Jack's right. There was a lot of gambling as far as all these different elements. And, we see so many films that tried to pair up all different elements and all that, and it doesn't always quite pan out. But I think looking back at it, you can definitely say that it does better than most, especially for its time period.
Because, as I say, you got the violence, you've got humor, you've got really crude humor and off-color humor. You got people just discussing philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like seriously, what other kind of film could do, where some scenes are just, you've got really kind of out there filming techniques and constant back and forth in the time stream and breaking the fourth wall. A lot of it really shouldn't work, but I just think it
somehow does.
It's great. It somehow does.
It was a movie for the new millennium. Yeah. It was a different kind of film.
So acting then. I love the acting from Edward Norton and Brad Pitt when Pitt pours chemicals, over his hand and Tyler's like, embrace the pain and let yourself free, etc. And he's being in complete control of the situation while Edward Norton is freaking out in pain. Then cut to the next scene where Edward Norton is in his office and his boss confronts him about a piece of paper that has on it the rules of Fight Club. But Edward Norton doesn't panic. He embodies Tyler in that moment.
Yeah, that was great.
You're basically watching Tyler Durden as Norton playing him before the reveal. And says whoever wrote this is extremely dangerous and could come into the office one day and kill everyone. Norton doesn't do too much, but just enough to create that sense that he's completely in control. And again, another example of how Norton and Tyler are the same character through acting.
The best part of that scene that I loved was how he very quickly and authoritatively snatches the paper out of his boss's hand and pulls it away like, give me that fucking thing. You know? And like at that moment, you're just like, oh my God, he just owned his boss. He just...
And I think what makes this really effective is the fact just how different he is at the beginning of the film. He's very submissive. He's very weaselly. He's very like recluse and in himself. He would never raise his voice to anybody. And Tyler is completely the opposite. Tyler is brash. Tyler can be quite intimidating. And I just love how in that scene, he embodies his inner Tyler. And you're like, oh my God, it's rubbed off on him. Do you know what I mean? And he's very different.
I agree.
At that moment,
One of my favorite scenes actually is what we haven't talked about yet from Brad Pitt, where they're in the basement at Fight Club and Lou, the owner of the bar, turns up wondering why all these people are in the basement and starts beating on Tyler.
You don't know where I've been, Lou.
Brad Pitt is really funny in this scene with his line delivery. I got it. Shit, I lost it. Punch.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
And after each beating, Pitt is laughing his head off like he's really enjoying it. Then Pitt pounces on Lou and he's shouting at Lou desperately to let them use the basement for Fight Club so it can carry on. And it's kind of like, an Ali Foreman rope-a-dope kind of thing going on. But even though he could probably beat him up from the start anyway, Pitt on Lou. But
right.
Yeah, that's one of the most entertaining scenes for me. And laugh out loud funny.
That was funny, yeah. I love how the guy with the gun is like throwing up. He's like, oh my God, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody's absolutely disgusted.
Yeah.
I know. They're just amazing. And I love when he tells them, you need to get into a fight and I want you to lose. It's like that was the whole point. The point was not to become a badass fighter. The point was to be able to take just incredible amount of punishment and experience the high from that. That's what it was about.
It
was about getting high off of getting your ass kicked.
There's another great little unraveling of what's really going on, but it's hidden within great writing as well, where Norton is called into his office, into his boss's office, and his boss is about to fire him. Norton starts beating up himself, throwing himself through the glass in the room. And of course, the first time you watch it, you think, Norton is conning his boss into firing his boss.
Yeah.
And claiming compensation to fund the fight clubs, etc. But the second time you watch it, you're faced with even more intrigue. Is he actually trying to con his boss, or is he actually fighting against Tyler? It's just an incredible acting from Norton beating himself up.
And I love how he says, for some reason, I'm reminded of my first fight with Tyler.
Yeah, that was great.
That was a big reveal right there, but you had no idea yet because you didn't know what was coming. But he basically spelled it out right there. He dropped a big clue right there, but he had hidden it so well, like you said, Martin, that you didn't pick up on it.
I was going to say, a scene that I found really funny was with how he initiated people into Project Mayhem. So the applicant has to stay there 3 days on the porch.
Oh,
if he's too old, say he's too old. If he's too young, say he's too young. And you just keep rejecting him.
Too old, fat man.
Yeah.
Your tits are too big.
Yeah, that was funny.
And you're too fucking blonde.
Yeah, that one, That was hilarious, You're too fucking blonde.
That's just harsh. That's really harsh. Favorite performances, people? Who are we picking?
Helena Bonham Carter.
Nick, who would you go for?
Yeah, I guess I would say the same.
I think I'm going to go Brad Pitt, actually.
In a tight three-way race,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I think they're very, very
Yeah.
close to each other. They're all incredible.
They are, because each one of them brings strong performances in every scene that they're in. I don't ever see there's a weakness, because most of the scenes, not most of the scenes, but a lot of the scenes are them interacting with each other and just constantly, pushing the narrative. Not to say that the supporting characters aren't good, but they each bring something a little bit unique. So it's really hard to say who, the three of them, who kind of pulls ahead.
Yeah.
I guess I think it would be hard, but I guess I would say that probably Carter kind of pulls ahead just a smidgen, but I would say it would be Carter, Pitt, and then Norton.
I'd agree with that.
I'm going to flip that and have Pitt as my number one.
Oh, yeah.
I do completely agree with you that, Helen is just amazing.
Yeah, they're all awesome. If I were to pick one, I think I would probably go Brad Pitt as well.
Yeah, for me, it's Carter, Pitt, and Norton, like Nick said. A very close race, especially between Pitt and Carter.
Acting score, Boaz, what should we go with? Like a straight 9 or 9.1 or something?
Yeah, let's go straight 9.
Jack and Nick, what's your score for acting?
I'd say 9.5.
Really?
Yeah, I would too.
And honorable mention for the late Meatloaf, who did a wonderful job as Robert Paulson.
Yeah.
His name is Robert Paulson.
His name is Robert Paulson.
His name is Robert Paulson.
But I agree, because out of all the, for lack of a better word, henchmen, the Fight Club, he had the best performance.
Yeah, and he's the one you liked.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Right. You know what, too, is that you see this little evolution of his character.
Yeah, you see him come into his own. He's so sad and he's emotional, and they lift him up.
He was surprisingly good in this. I was actually very surprised at the quality of his performance in this. I didn't know he could act that well.
At the end, too, when he was kind of coming into his own, he had that look where he was kind of looking through the tops of his eyes, and you could tell that there was more going on inside his head, to the point where if his character hadn't passed away, you could tell that he was going to become a big player in this whole thing, or could have, just because the way he was kind of turning into his own. I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but it's like when you see Full Metal Jacket and I forget the big guy's name.
Oh, Lawrence,
and how like Lawrence is this very emotional, very like, I want to go home. I want to be close to comforts, and he's on the verge of leaving. And then the more he gets pushed, and the more things don't work out his way, he becomes an entirely different guy. And at the very end, you see that. And I almost feel like this is kind of like Meatloaf, where he's kind of coming to that kind of point, the evolution a little bit.
Right, let's add up the scores then for Fight Club. Fight Club gets a very, very impressive 55.3. So very much killing them softly very hard.
Well, it wasn't a fair fight.
No. All right, next episode, as a movie Beast is coming out in cinemas, and that stars Big Driss. Yes, that's right, Idris Elba. So we'll be talking Idris Elba films, and hopefully have guests again for that pod from the Pointless spin-off pod from Australia. So that'll be very exciting. The Real Thing, where can we find you?
We're on pretty much all podcast platforms, wherever you want to listen to podcasts. You can find our website at therealthingpodcast.com, REEL. And that's got our entire list of episodes and everything. You can listen to all of them. Thank you so much for having us here today.
Yeah. You guys have been amazing. You sure can talk in detail about these films.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's really good.
And we would love to return the favor and have you guys on our show.
Yeah.
We'll definitely set that up.
It's bye-bye from Jack and Nick.
Nicholas.
Yeah.
He's still with us.
And of course, my imaginary friend can go back into my mind. Bye-bye, boss.
As long as you don't blow your fucking brains out with me in them.
There's no gun around, so it's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye, people. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
That's it for part 2. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 1 if you haven't done so already. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell us what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for Twitter at FVF_podcast. If you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode. If you're feeling really generous, you can buy us a one-off coffee at our Buy Me a Coffee account. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.